Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew just flipped on its head? Maybe you had a plan, a direction in life, and then one thing came along that made you rethink everything. Today, I want to talk about one book that did exactly that for me. Before reading it, I had no interest in ever becoming an entrepreneur because I thought that meant long hours, lots of stress, huge upfront investment. But this book made me realize that there's another way, a way to build a business that brings both financial freedom and the ability to live life on your own terms. Since reading this book, I've been able to build a business that's brought in over $4 million, but more importantly, it's given me the freedom to spend more time with my family, live abroad for months at a time, and even take my kids out of school for a semester and travel around the country in an RV, which we are about to set off and do. Stick around because this episode could change the way you think about entrepreneurship and give you the tools to create a business that works for you, not the other way around. You're listening to the Online Course Show, where we dive deep into the strategies and tools that help online course creators build thriving businesses. I'm Jacques Hopkins, and over the past 11 years, I've built a successful online course business teaching piano, and I'm here to share the lessons I've learned along the way. All right, the book is called The 4-Hour Workweek. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding it in my hands right now. Many of you are probably very familiar with this book. It's become wildly popular, and honestly, a lot of people attribute their start in online business to this book. It's a huge part of my story as well. Maybe even knew that that's the book that I'd be talking about when you saw the title of this episode. The thing is that before reading this book, I had no interest in becoming an entrepreneur. I thought that entrepreneurship meant having a brick and mortar presence. It meant managing a large staff, working like 100-hour weeks, needing a lot of upfront capital to get started, whether that's venture capital or taking out a lot of debt. And none of that appealed to me at all. So because of that, entrepreneurship was never on my radar. My entire life, I wanted to be an engineer of some sort. That goes back to like first grade when I was good at math. I was not good at all the subjects, but I was just naturally good at math, and I would always turn in my math tests and things before everybody else. And my first grade teacher looked at me one day and she said, "You should be an engineer one day." And I also just loved building things. I loved Legos and things like that. So all my life I wanted to be an engineer, and I didn't want to run my own engineering company for the reasons we talked about. I wanted to work as an engineer. But then one day, it was my senior year of college in engineering, I picked up this book for the first time. It was like 2000, probably early 2008. And I guess the title was appealing to me for some reason, but that book completely changed how I thought about entrepreneurship. And reading the book completely changed my perspective. I had a total paradigm shift on what it meant to be, or what it could mean to be an entrepreneur, because the author, Tim Ferriss, who, like I said, many of you are probably very familiar with him at this point. He's written lots of other books. I believe this was his first one, but he set up a business that was very passive, and he built it on systems and automation and outsourcing, and to where he didn't have to spend a lot of time on it each week, but it brought in a lot of money. And the coolest thing, and what really drew me in, was all of these cool things that the author was able to do because of his thriving online business. And so for the first time in my life, I wanted that. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to be this type of entrepreneur, but I already had my job lined up, and I'm not a big risk taker. And so I went to work as an engineer, all the while trying to create some sort of online business like he suggested in that book. And I had a lot of failures. I tried a lot of things. Many of you maybe have heard me talk about this before when I've interviewed on other podcasts. I often will bring this up because it's such a big part of my story. I tried blogs. I tried inventing physical products. I tried apps. For me, it wasn't until I got an idea for an online course that I made even a single dollar from any of those ventures. So I had a lot of failures, meaning none of them ever brought in any money, even a single dollar. But they kind of all led me to this path of eventually creating an online piano course back in 2013, and the rest is history. It's been very, very successful. And because of the success of that course, I learned a lot of things the hard way. I learned a lot of the business concepts that I didn't have a background in, marketing, sales, things like that. I started this podcast back in 2017, and I enjoy this business, the Online Course Guy, even more than the first one of teaching piano. And so there's really three big takeaways that I want you to get from this story and just from me telling you about this book. The first one is that simply entrepreneurship doesn't have to mean sacrificing your life. Like I said earlier, it's kind of the other way around. What I would be able to do, and the vision of that, is what motivated me to not want to continue to be an engineer the rest of my life, not want to work for somebody else the rest of my life, and be able to make even more money, but have an even bigger impact on other people, and then have that freedom that I wanted in my life. Going back to the impact thing, I didn't hate my job. A lot of people working a full-time job, they want to get into courses or online business so they can quit that job, dead-end job. I didn't hate my job. It wasn't perfect either, because I wasn't able to do all these cool things with my life that I wanted to do. I didn't have that freedom that I wanted. I remember one of my colleagues, he was actually a really good friend of mine. He took 3 weeks off of work to go to Europe with his his wife. He didn't have kids at the time. And I was like, man, he is so selfish. He's leaving for 3 weeks, and I'm going to have to take up some of his workload. And I could never go to my boss and ask for that, even though looking back, I totally could have. I had a great boss. I worked that job as an engineer, same company for 8 years. Awesome boss, awesome company. But I was scared, and I wanted to, it was weird because I was like pursuing my career. I was trying to, do better and work my way up while also working on some sort of side business to make that work. But I was scared to do something like my colleague had done, just to take 3 weeks off. And I could have, but that just wasn't part of my mindset at the time. So like I said, the first takeaway is entrepreneurship doesn't have to mean sacrificing your life. And so I pursued some sort of online business the way that Tim Ferriss described in the book. Second thing is that failing is part of the process. Some of you will fail more than others, but it is certainly part of the process. I didn't jump straight into the online course thing. I tried other things first. The book is not about online courses. He doesn't mention online courses a single time. And obviously, that's a direction I would like for you to go in. I'm a big fan of them, and that's why you're listening to this podcast. But I don't think I would have gotten there if I hadn't tried those other things. And I learned along the way with each failure. I learned things that I wasn't good at. I learned things that I was good at. And by the time I got to the point of an online course, I was so much better off for having had those failures before. And once I got the idea for an online course, it's not like everything was sunshine and rainbows either. So I continue to fail even to this day, certainly, and try to learn from those things and fail forward. And the third takeaway that I want to talk about is a concept I learned from that book, was when you're looking at decisions, particularly big decisions in your life, he talks about looking at it from a best case, worst case scenario on a 1 to 10 scale. So for example, when I was deciding to quit my job to pursue piano in 21 days full time, it hadn't really made it yet. It was only bringing in about $1,000 a month. And so quitting my job felt very risky. We had a baby at the time. My wife had quit her job when we had our oldest daughter. And so it did feel like a lot of risk. But when I looked at it through this lens of best case, worst case scenario, worst case scenario was I try it, I quit my job, I try it, and it doesn't work, and I go back to work, right? Like I said, I didn't hate my job. I could probably go back to the same company or find some other job. And so worst case scenario was a 6 out of 10 or something like that. But best case scenario was it works, I make even more money, and I have the freedom and the impact that I was looking for. So best case scenario was a 10 out of 10. Was it worth risking a 6 out of 10, which is not that bad, for a potential 10 out of 10? And when I looked at it through that lens, the choice was obvious, and it certainly paid off in the long run. And so that is the one book that changed everything for me. I want to share, since we're talking about books, I want to share some other of my most highly recommended books that I've just gotten massive value out of. And I'll share that with you in a second. But before I do, I want to make sure you're aware that I've got a totally free workshop for you. If you're interested in starting an online course business, or maybe you have one already and it's not where you want it to be, and you want to learn some new systems, processes, tools, strategies, techniques to make it even better, whichever camp you're in, this workshop is for you. It's about 35 minutes. It's not super long. It's on demand, and it is the culmination of me with my own online course businesses, as well as all the just wildly successful course creators that I've had on this podcast, as well as the people that I've worked with personally on their own course businesses. I've found the common threads among the really successful people, and I share those common things for you in this workshop. It's called the Online Course Business Formula. Once again, it's totally free. You can find that at oc.show/workshop. Check that out if you want to take this whole online course thing deeper and learn some of my best tips and strategies for you. Okay, so let's talk about some more books. I have, normally these books are, if you're watching, they're on my shelf behind me in the main shot I usually have here in my studio. I pulled the best ones, in my opinion, down so I could show you on camera if you are watching. So in no particular order, Expert Secrets by Russell Brunson. I don't love this title because it took me a while to read it because I didn't really understand what it was about. So many of you have probably read this when it came out many years ago. Russell Brunson is the creator of ClickFunnels. I often say that this book could have been called How to Put Together an Amazing Webinar to Sell Lots and Lots of Copies of Your Online Course. So this is all about that. And so if you're interested in putting together a webinar or just how to sell more copies of your online course, or maybe you have a webinar already that can be improved, this is an incredible resource. Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. The biggest thing I learned from this book was that you are not the hero in the story, you are the guide, right? People are looking to you to be their guide, and they are the hero in the story. So for example, when somebody wants to learn piano, I don't want to position myself and my messaging, whether it's on my website or my webinar, wherever, YouTube videos, as their hero in their story. I am the perfect guide to help them get to their ultimate dream outcome that they're looking for. And they're the hero. They're the ones that wants to accomplish these amazing things in their life. In this case, learning to play piano and learning to play their favorite songs in their piano, and they need that perfect guide to get there. So that's what I learned from that book. This one is called From 6 to 7 Figures by Austin Netzley. So the key about this book is the things that you need to do to grow a business to 6 figures are not necessarily the same things to do to scale from 6 figures to 7 figures and beyond. And basically, to get to the 6-figure mark, it takes a lot of grinding, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of hustle, but you will burn out, and those strategies don't scale very well. And so it takes a lot of systems and automation to scale, and you learn a lot about that in this book. I'm a big fan. All right, next one is from one of my key mentors over the years, Cochrane, How to Get Paid for What You Know. This is all about online courses and running an online course business. Mike Michalowicz is up next. He's one of my favorite small business authors. I love and recommend anything he's written. This is one of his early books, Profit First. And when you start a business, at least for me, nobody told me, here's how to run the finances in your business. And that's what this book is for. It's a very simple yet powerful system on how to manage the finances in your business. It's a system that I wholeheartedly believe in and follow pretty religiously. And it's had just a huge impact. Next up is Atomic Habits by James Clear. This is about, the subtitle is An Easy and Proven Way to Build Good Habits and Break Bad Ones. The idea behind Atomic Habits is it's like these little habits, and it's a lot about systems, setting up systems so that you don't fail. And one of the quotes that I'll share with you from this book is one of my favorite quotes of all time. I have it written on my board over here that you can't see. Even if you are watching the video. The quote is, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." So all of us have goals. We have aspirations. We want to make $100,000 a month from our online course business, but that's not good enough. We have to set up the systems to help us get there. And you will always fall to the level of the systems that you have in place. So I'll just give you one small example, this podcast right here. When I set out to create a podcast, I had a goal of having a podcast and putting out content and growing the audience and building trust with that audience and get them to wanting to buy things from me and so on. Those are goals, but I've set up systems behind that to make sure I'm consistently producing content, quality content, and content that gets you to trust me and builds rapport with you, and having the right calls to action and things like that. And so the goal itself is not good enough. It's a good thing to have goals, but you've got to have systems behind them because you always fall to the level of your systems. Since we're talking about books, I couldn't talk about books without mentioning the Bible. I am a Christian. I don't talk about that a lot on this podcast, but it is a book that I keep behind me on the shelf. This is not a religious podcast, and like I said, I don't talk about that very much, but we're talking about books, and the Bible is important to me. I do believe that there is historical evidence that Jesus was a real person. I believe that he is the Son of God. I believe that he died to save us and that the resurrection was a real event that occurred. And I think that there are hundreds of eyewitness accounts and testimonies of that fact, which makes me believe that that actually happened. But like I said, this is not meant to be a religious or spiritual episode, and it's not a topic I bring up very much, and it's not a topic you necessarily are here to hear me talk about. But I think whether you are religious or not, or a believer or not, I think that the lessons and model that Jesus has for us on the best way to live your life are very powerful. And you know, Jesus is all about love, and that's a message that I try to live by and love other people kind of no matter what. And so that is something that's very, very important to me. And I certainly don't always get it right. I am certainly not perfect, but I think it's important to read this book as often as I can. Now, those are some of the physical books that I have on the shelf behind me. I'm also a big fan of reading Kindle books and audiobooks. I read a lot on my Kindle Scribe, so for digital books. I use Audible for audiobooks. So just a few others that I don't necessarily have the physical copy of that I highly recommend would be $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozi. I've had multiple physical copies of that book, but I always end up giving it away to somebody. $100 Million Offers is all about crafting irresistible offers for your audience. Many of you have read that one. It's incredible. Launch by Jeff Walker, about launching products. He has been on the podcast. He is an absolute titan and guru in the industry. That's Launch. Here's one, the YouTube Formula. That's another one where I had the physical copy and have since given it away. But if you are interested in YouTube or you have a YouTube channel, that is my go-to resource for all things YouTube. It is really, really good. So if you're interested in YouTube at all, make sure you've read the YouTube Formula. There are plenty of other books that I could mention, but I will cut it off there. I think reading is really, really important. I think you should make it part of your routine because it's an incredible way for brilliant minds to put down just absolute gold in a very inexpensive format that you can consume and then take action on. You know, I was in the episode with, hey, make sure you're not just listening, but taking action. I think that's really important to do with books as well. And so one thing I like to do is make my reading actionable. And if I can't have one like key actionable thing for every even like chapter that I'm reading in a book, then I'm doing something wrong. And so that's one thing when I'm reading nonfiction books like these is to make notes and make actionable notes, even on a chapter by chapter basis. That is going to do it for this solo episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like a list of these books, you can find those in the show notes. You can find the show notes by going to oc.show/239. And remember to check out that free workshop that I told you about at oc.show/workshop. Thank you so much again for listening. Remember to not just listen, but to take action on what you've heard here today. I'm rooting for you.